The 16th century was a time of brutal and inventive execution methods, often designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering as a form of punishment, deterrence, or public spectacle. Here are some of the most cruel and terrifying methods used during this period, along with prominent examples. If you have any comments about these methods or something to add, please use the comments section. Also, a like or even a subscription would be awesome. 1. Breaking on the wheel. Description: the condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, and their limbs were systematically broken with an iron bar or hammer. Sometimes, the victim was left to die slowly on the wheel, exposed to the elements, or finished off with a blow to the chest or neck. Example: in 1581, the Dutch rebel Diederik Sonoy was sentenced to be broken on the wheel for his role in the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule. His execution was a gruesome public display meant to crush dissent. 2. Hanging, drawing, and quartering. Description: reserved for traitors, this method involved hanging the victim until they were nearly dead, then disemboweling and castrating them while still alive. The body was then cut into 4 pieces, and the head was displayed on a spike. Example: in 1606, following the gunpowder plot, Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators were sentenced to this fate. Fawkes managed to jump from the gallows and break his neck, sparing himself the worst of the torture. 3. Burning at the stake. Description: the victim was tied to a stake and surrounded by wood, which was then set ablaze. This method was often used for heretics, witches, and those accused of religious crimes. The fire was sometimes slow, ensuring prolonged agony. Example: in 1556, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a key figure in the English Reformation, was burned at the stake for heresy under Queen Mary I. He famously thrust his right hand, which had signed his recantation, into the flames first as a symbol of repentance. 4. The Iron Maiden. Description: a coffin-like structure lined with sharp iron spikes, the Iron Maiden was designed to impale the victim slowly as the doors were closed. The spikes were strategically placed to avoid vital organs, prolonging the victim's suffering. Example: while its historical use is debated, the Iron Maiden is often associated with medieval and early modern torture. It was said to have been used in Nuremberg, Germany, as a tool of execution and terror. 5. Flaying. Description: the skin of the victim was peeled off in strips, often while they were still alive. This excruciating method was used to punish traitors, blasphemers, and enemies of the state. Example: in 1525, during the German Peasants' War, rebel leaders were flayed as a warning to others who might challenge authority. Their skins were sometimes displayed in public as a grim reminder of the consequences of rebellion. 6. Impalement. Description: the victim was pierced through the body with a sharp stake, often entering through the rectum or vagina and exiting through the mouth or shoulder. The stake was then raised vertically, leaving the victim to die slowly from their injuries and exposure. Example: Vlad the Impaler, though earlier than the 16th century, inspired this method's use in Eastern Europe. It was occasionally employed during the 16th century as a brutal form of execution for criminals and enemies. 7. The Judas cradle. Description: the victim was suspended above a pyramid-shaped seat and slowly lowered onto it, causing the sharp point to penetrate their body. Weights were sometimes added to increase the pain and damage. Example: used during the Spanish Inquisition, this method was a favorite for extracting confessions from heretics and blasphemers. The victim often died from infection or internal bleeding days later. 8. Boiling alive. Description: the condemned was placed in a large cauldron of water, oil, or tar, which was then heated to boiling. Death was slow and excruciating, as the victim cooked alive. Example: in 1531, Richard Roos, a cook accused of poisoning his employer's food, was boiled alive in England under the orders of King Henry VIII. This method was later abolished, but it remains one of the most horrifying forms of execution. 9. Sawing in half. Description: the victim was hung upside down and sawed in half vertically, starting at the groin. Being inverted ensured they remained conscious for as long as possible. Example: this method was used during the Spanish Inquisition for crimes such as blasphemy and heresy. The public nature of the execution added to its psychological terror. 10. The Catherine wheel description: similar to breaking on the wheel, the victim was tied to a large wheel and beaten until their bones were shattered. The wheel was then hoisted on a pole, and the victim was left to die slowly from their injuries or exposure. Example: in 1597, the Catholic martyr Saint Margaret Clitheroe was pressed to death with weights, but the Catherine wheel was used on other martyrs during the Protestant Reformation as a brutal warning to dissenters. These methods were not only designed to kill but to inflict unimaginable suffering and terrorize onlookers. The 16th century was a dark time when cruelty was often seen as a necessary tool of justice and control. Please like and subscribe.